Hi, I'm a serverless application developer, and this is my online grocery application. It receives orders and checks stock. My application is quite simple. It has API gateway, two microservices implemented as Lambda functions, and a database. I'm close to the finishing line, so I'm running load tests on my application to monitor the SLO. Just before I went out for lunch, everything looked great. Everything was green. But on my way back to the office, I started to receive those notification emails about something not working. So something is definitely broken. Looks like my application is experiencing an outage. I need to start investigating. Now, my application is instrumented with application signals, which gives me this picture right away, and I see a lot of red. So I need to start investigating. As you remember, my application has an API and a couple of microservices, so I will start with the entry point with the API right here. If I click it, I would immediately see that in the recent few minutes, the latency for my services and dependencies has grown quite a lot. It actually spiked, right? And I see that that's the reason my API is unhealthy. So if I switch to service operations, I will immediately see additional data showing me exactly the same picture. The requests and availability, the latency, which is growing significantly, and also number of faults, which is more than it should be. So in order to start investigating further, I'm clicking one of those data points, and application signal immediately shows me associated traces that resulted in fault. So if I'm clicking one of those traces, I will immediately see the map of my services. So this is end-to-end trace of my application, including all of its components. I can immediately see this application-centric end-to-end observability. I can see that the API gateway is returning failures, it's red, but there is another failure downstream that might be causing it, and that's my order receiver function. So if I look at the trace in a little bit more detail, I can see that yes, there is a red box right here showing fault next to the order receiver function. Now, as an operator, I would probably at this point delegate to the development team to investigate their code. But since I'm also a developer, I want to see logs for what's going on during this failure. Now, I can see logs right here, right, in application signals using the integrated experience, or I can go separately to CloudWatch. But my favorite place to view live logs is actually exactly where my code is. So this is my Lambda function. This is the code of the Lambda function. And in order to see logs for this function, I'm going to click Run and Debug, and then I'm going to open CloudWatch Live Tail. Now, let me start it. This essentially allows me to see live logs from my microservices as they're being consumed. So I can definitely see that there is a lot of information here. I can see occasional errors, right? And the error is saying stock check timeout. Okay, let's try to investigate this a little bit further. So I'm going to stop this log tail. I'm going to run it with a new filter pattern for stock check. Let me start it again. So now I will only see errors for whenever I had something related to stock check. And I can see right away that I do have a lot of errors, but it's not always failing. Sometimes it's actually successful. So I can see stock check timeout, but I can also sometimes see stock check success. So it's not failing all the time. If I open one of those entries, you will see that it's actually formatted as JSON. This is super helpful. This is structured logging that helps me not just to understand what the problem is, but also run queries on my logs, as you will see in several minutes. So here I can see that I have the service name, the ID of the product, milk that was actually requested during the stock check, the ID of the customer that requested it, and the quantity of that product that was requested. All right, so I know that my stock check is timing out. So let's switch to the stock checker function, because we know it's a separate function. And here I can immediately see the problem. I can see that during recent deployment, there was a bug introduced here, right? And I can see that the maximum processing time is way higher than I would expect it to be. So let me change that back to the proper value, right? And let me click deploy to deploy the function right here from my code editor. All right. Now, as a developer, I suspect that I just fixed the problem, but I also need to validate my assumption. So how do I know that the problem is actually fixed? Well, I can use exactly the same technique. So let me go back to the order receiver, right? And let's continue looking at the logs. So you can see that all the messages right now are stock check success, stock check success. So I'm not seeing errors anymore. I'm not seeing failures anymore. So this is one way to validate that my function is actually working properly. Okay, let me stop that. There's another way to validate that, right? Because we know that that failure actually caused latency. So let's give it about 60 seconds to pick up new metrics. And in the meanwhile, I want to show you how do I actually enable all of this observability. And it's quite easy. Right here in the configuration of my Lambda function, I can set up the format for my logs. This can be JSON or text. I'm definitely using JSON. And if I want to enable additional observability like integration with application signals or integration with X-ray, this is literally a checkbox in the console or a property in infrastructure as code. It's very easy to enable this. Let's switch to the monitoring tab. I want to see, right here, let's switch that to the last 15 minutes. All right. Right here in my integrated environment, I can see all the metrics that I want for my Lambda function, and I can immediately see that my function is indeed recovering. I can see the duration is dropping, right? Both, minimum, maximum, and average. So this is exactly what I would expect. So going once again, one step back, I want to see my services. And I want to see the SLA, right, for my API. This is what we started with. Let me frame this to the last 15 minutes. And I can also see that it's starting to recover. So the last data point I received, the availability is actually at 100 and it's no longer breaching the SLI. Now, it will take some time for things to become green again, because I just experienced several minutes of downtime, but using the observability suite, I found the problem quite efficiently. I fixed the problem. I validated that the problem is no longer occurring. So the only thing left to do is to wait for those SLI to recover. Now, as they recover, if this were a production application, I would need to run a root cause analysis to understand what happened and what was the impact. Now, I already know the technical part of it, right? I already fixed that problem and I know the technical part of this. But it would be great to include business impact that is a result of this failure. So in order to do that, I can use logs insights, and I can actually build insights based on the JSON logs that I'm outputting in my application. So to give you a couple of examples, I already have pre-built queries here, which are pretty simple. So this one will give me failure rate per customer. And if I run this query, I will see that I had 4 customers during the failure, and Anton's restaurant was most affected, right? Others were affected mildly, but Anton's restaurant was probably submitting the highest number of orders. It was affected the most. Now I can look at another query, right? I just know who's the most affected customer, but also I would like to know what were the most in-demand products during that outage. So I can see failures per product type, right? So now I know for sure that during the outage, milk was definitely in the most demand. Cheese and bread were second most popular, and wine and ketchup were the lowest. So I can not just see my technical metrics, I can also see business metrics and business logs from my applications. This concludes my demo, and I hope you enjoyed this little dive into various pieces of end-to-end observability with AWS.